Kids. Yeah, well, we should probably get this going sooner than later. So, it's a pretty good showing. So, Anna Porter is not coming. Yeah, that's really too bad. So bad. Anyway, she said she had a family emergency. Well, I see if I see it.
Yeah, I did. Moderate with crime.
It'll be wonderful.
It just needs I think someone is sitting here.
Sherry said you want
Hello. Hello, test mic. Okay. We are about to start. Hello. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's a full house. We are so glad to see you. Here to attend our third Writers in Exile event. I would like to say a few words about our today's event and welcome. Thank you everyone for being here today. I would like to welcome the distinguished authors, journalists, and artists, and we are glad to have Mary Jo and all our friends and mentors and seniors. Dear journalists, community leaders, human rights activists, and participants in this Voice of Freedom, today marks the third event since PEN Canada Writers in Exile community officially launched its reading events. The first being held in this venue last year in November. There have been two events prior to this one, and there are two coming in June and November this year. In the previous reading forums, we hosted 12 authors and writers. The readings and their presence inspired us and made our events excellent. Today, 4 accomplished writers and journalists from Iran, Mexico, Afghanistan, and Myanmar are presenting their work. We welcome them and thank them for their voices and for being here with us today. If their works these writers focuses on, these writers focuses on freedom of expression, violation of human rights, violation of women's rights, and other pressing issues of our time. As you all know, we are living in an age when tyranny has reigned, and an age when millions have been exiled or killed by various authoritarian regimes in various parts of the world. In the country where I came from, Ethiopia, more than 1 million people have died in a civil war in the last 2 years. They have been slaughtered because of who they are, because of their ethnic identity. Millions more have been displaced. People are being slaughtered by governments and other armed forces. Women have been raped and killed, often in selective process based on ethnicity and identity. Journalists have been arrested in mass. There have been no accountability. Law and justice are unknown. Because of this, journalists have a great responsibility than ever before. And so we join the writers and journalists who will not stop writing until we see this unjust world changed, until democracy and freedom of expression prevail. This is why we believe that the voice of immigrants writers is important, and it's why PEN Canada works to support their voices and to give them a profile. Writers in Exile would like to thank our great senior volunteers and mentors for their unreserved support and for their hard work that makes this reading event successful. Mary Jo Lady and Romero House, Hannah Fisher, Annalie Andre Barrett, Margot Kelly, Paula Gomez, John Lishman, and for making the beautiful posters and promotional materials, Amir Yazembot. Thank you very much, as well to HIRUT Jazz Cafe, Tbamolda Michael, and HIRUT Haile Muskan, our host and editor, Keith Rose Leakey, PEN Canada, and especially Grace Westcott and President, and Brendan Dakaris, the Executive Director, and Teresa Johnson, Office Manager. Thank you all for your unreserved support. I also would like to mention Our financial support, the Toronto Arts Council. This event could not happen without its support. We are grateful. Technical support comes from Anthony. Thank you, Anthony, for your wonderful job. Once again, I would like to say thank you all for being with us, and I'll give the podium to our great host, Keith.
Hello, folks. Welcome to this PEN Canada Writers in Exile reading. And welcome to the HIRUT Ethiopian Jazz Club. I was always intrigued by this jazz club. And when I first came here, I felt this warm spirit, but I wasn't sure what HIRUT meant. And I remember thinking, you know, Aaron Berhaney had named his newspaper after a river, and I wonder if HIRUT was perhaps something geographical or a metaphor for music or poetry or spirit, maybe something about love or beauty. And so I asked Tebebe, and he said, "No, it's just my wife's name." But that stands for all of those things, HIRUT. So thank you both, HIRUT and Tebebe, for being our hosts here tonight. We have 4 fine writers from Afghanistan, Iran, Myanmar, and Mexico reading their work today. This is a small club, so I would just ask you to keep any conversation very quiet, because sometimes at the back you can't hear very well, although Anthony has adjusted the speakers, so we should be fine. So I'd like to, without further ado, invite our first reader, who is Bilal Sarwari from Afghanistan. Bilal?
Thank you.
Salam alaikum. Bilal Kub Asti. When Bilal Sarwari was forced to leave Afghanistan after the Taliban stormed power in 2021, he told CBC Radio it was like taking a knife in the heart. As an Afghan journalist, he has worked extensively with Western media, including the BBC and other ABC for 20 years, putting him on the Taliban's execution list. Bilal is a scholar majoring in the linkages between warfare, drugs, and terrorism, with a degree from Middlebury College in Vermont. He is in Canada with his wife and daughter, Sola.
Another daughter came 6 weeks ago.
Yes. What is her name?
Jeddah, as in the city in Saudi Arabia.
Okay. And
She's the first Canadian in the family.
And your wife,
Fauzia.
is she here today?
Unfortunately not, because it's not easy to be the mother of 2 small girls.
True enough.
But next time.
Okay. Bilal is fluent in Pashto, Dari, Urdu, and English. Welcome, Bilal.
Thank you very much for such a kind introduction. And we're a little bit sad, I'm on the line myself, that we're here during Ramadan, which means we cannot eat or drink anything. Thank you for having me. It's a really privilege. I'll try not to be intimidated by such a distinguished crowd. The following events, the first chapter that I'm going to read, The Bloody Pomegranates, this is based on true events that I covered in the year 2021 in the month of August. The Arvandab River Valley outside of the city of Kandahar is home to Afghan pomegranates, but unfortunately, that's also where some of the most destructive fighting took place, which eventually led to the fall of Kandahar and eventually to the fall of Afghanistan. So I will start with that. The Bloody Pomegranates. The Kabul debacle was actually scripted long before in Afghanistan's dusty hinterland. For months, the Taliban had been prodding Afghan security forces in the provinces, draining their energy and breaking their resolve bit by bit. But away from the eye, there was something else. War fatigue was corroding the Afghan forces and the Afghan people from within. This war has destroyed generations, said Syed Ahmad Jan, a police officer in Arghandab, a district in the southern province of Kandahar, known for its pomegranates. For John, this was too personal. The 54-year-old said his two brothers, both policemen, were shot dead in front of him, right on the doorsteps of their family home. Killing of government officials, policemen, and tribal elders had become a daily reality, he said. We're sick of this fighting. What has it given us? Nothing, said John. I'm now the only breadwinner in a house which is full of widows and orphans. As John sat down to have tea in his modest home, his police radio flashed one distressing news after another from across the district. There's a whole generation of Afghans who have never seen peace. They have known life only from the shadows of guns and violence. They are tired of this uncertainty. A deputy soon informed John that a Taliban fighter had driven an explosive-laden vehicle into a police post, killing 13 policemen and himself in the suicide attack. Many of those killed were personally known to John. Every day I attend the funeral of a dear one. Say goodbye to a beloved friend, John said, getting into an unmarked police car. Every day I pick up the pieces and start all over again. How long can one carry on like this? John said he mostly travels in a civilian car to outwit Taliban ambush teams lying in a wait for officers like him. Our team has engaged insurgents in the pomegranate orchard there. An Afghan Special Forces commander, just known as Sharif, said, pointing to a green oasis a few meters away. Before John could step out of his Toyota Corolla, a bullet grazed past his ear, leaving him bleeding and forcing everyone to duck for cover. A Taliban sniper had taken the shot. John signaled his men to take position, and the whole place erupted in heavy machine gun fire. John was escorted to safety by Sharif. We keep losing our friends like this, said the young officer sadly, looking in the direction of gunfire. There's so much pressure on the men. No one in my unit has taken a break in 6 months. I haven't had a shower in weeks. Just look at my beard, he said, pointing to his scruffy facial hair. John's men, however, were lucky this time. There were fewer casualties among them. But the bloody pomegranate garden was littered with corpses of Taliban fighters. We're in a vicious cycle of violence, bloodshed, and heartbreak. John said, taking stock of the destruction, whether we kill them or they kill us, ultimately, it is Afghanistan that bleeds. Note, the Taliban claimed the capital of Kandahar on August 12, 2021. This was the 11th provincial capital to fall within a week. This is a final story, which is also based on my final journey, actually. Leaving the Serena Hotel in downtown Kabul with my family for the Kabul airport. I was in a convoy of about 200 people, mostly from the media, civil society, but also from the entertainment industry. So people like who had been entertaining Afghans on Tolo TV and many others. And I called it at the time Afghanistan sort of deadly tsunami when we got on those buses. And thanks to the Qatari ambassador who escorted us in the middle of the night. A mad rush. It was madness at the airport. Thousands of Afghans jostled on the narrow road leading to the airport gate. Toddlers, teenagers, mothers with babies, young and old, all pressed tight against each other like cattle in a pen. Days before, the airport had seen heart-wrenching scenes of Afghans clinging onto the wheels of departing planes and their desperation to escape the Taliban, only to fall to their deaths moments later. While Taliban manned the access to the airport, inside the US Marines held control, with both firing occasionally in the air to instill some order in the milling crowd. At some points, the US Marines and Taliban fighters stood less than 2 meters apart, even working together to secure the passage for would-be refugees. A reflection of the tragic irony of war. Are we okay with that?
Carry on.
All right, that's very good to know. About 20 minutes of negotiations at the gate, the convoy was lit in, filling the air with joy. But a thought wavered to those on the other side of the airport, and the young men we had all pushed out of the bus. A sudden emptiness enveloped me. Helpless myself, I could only pray for them. The buildings inside the airport were all taken up by troops, US and of other countries who were now arriving in hordes. So we had to wait out in the scorching sun. Qatari officials served water, juice, and snakes. Qatari officials served water, juice, and snacks. The same thing, more or less. You know? As never-ending lines of Afghans boarded one military aircraft after another. As I sat on the tarmac, my life flashed before me 20 years ago, just when a passenger plane crashed into the World Trade Center in New York, followed by another one. I was an Afghan refugee boy selling carpets to gullible Westerners at a fake antique shop in Peshawar, Pakistan. My Afghan origins and command over Pashto and Dari and a working knowledge of English helped me get a job as a fixer with Abu Dhabi TV, whose new crew was keen to cross over into Afghanistan and report on the ensuing war. From there to ABC News and then to the BBC, one small step at a time shaped me into who I was. Over the following years, my travels to the remote interiors of Afghanistan and its front lines gave me a unique perspective of the life of ordinary Afghans, even as it forged my own identity in Afghan soil. But now, destiny, once again, was about to snatch this identity. I was going to be a refugee once again. Most of the planes landing at the airport were empty, but one had a group of foreign correspondents on board. I spotted among them Lise Doucet, my old friend and BBC's chief international correspondent. Bilal, you were always the one who said, I'll never leave Afghanistan. Lise said, as I slowly trudged up the line towards a waiting C-17 military transport plane. She was right. I had never imagined that I would be at the crossroads once again, with empty pockets and a broken heart. My love affair with Afghanistan is fatal, I told her. A torrent of tears broke the barrier as the C-17 took off. Today, I have buried my dreams, but I have not lost hope, not yet. I will be back. Note, this is a factual account. Some names and descriptions of people have been changed to protect their identity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bilal. I find it very interesting that you were with a group of celebrities, entertainers, singers, poets, I suppose, recognized faces that could no longer stay in Afghanistan because they would have been on television or they would be known and they had to get out. Like yourself, you were a spokesman, an anti-war spokesman, and the Taliban had you on their list. So what a plane load of people that were leaving Afghanistan. It's very tragic.
When Lise kind of forced her way into me at the airport, we had to talk to Lise because she has been coming to Afghanistan since the 80s. And I call her the mother of Afghan journalism. She's trained so many of us. The one word that I had in that interview, Keith, was that this was a brain drain. My wife recognized this very popular Afghan TV hostess on Tulu TV, Afghanistan's most popular TV stations. They're still putting up a fight. And her name was Mariam Khorrami. So we would start our morning with Good Morning Tulu. And when I looked at her, I saw that Afghanistan was gone. When I saw that there was no place for people like Mariam and many of our colleagues, obviously the Taliban put a ban on all forms of entertainment, on music, and later on they would basically go and literally remove Afghan women from the public sphere, right? Not give them jobs, let alone entertainment. So it was sad, but I think in a nutshell, what that airplane for me was everything going down the drain in a matter of sort of days or hours, that we had all failed collectively in Afghanistan, sadly did not have a peace process. It was an exit deal, and that led to the Taliban takeover.
I wanted to ask you, you depended on Qatar, the ambassador, to help get you out. And did you have a plan B? If it wasn't for Qatar, how would you have exited Afghanistan?
Well, a couple of things complicated, I think, my presence. One, that I had run for parliament from my hometown in eastern Afghanistan on an anti-Islamic State, anti-Al-Qaeda platform, but also sort of on an education platform, coupled with reporting on the war. And, war reporting was never sort of seen, okay. And I think before Kabul fell, you had this series of assassinations, very mysterious assassinations, where members of the civil society, female judges, members of the media, they were all killed and murdered or on doorsteps at Kabul. And my name somehow was on a number of those lists. So I had all along the fear, but I had also hoped that my daughter Sola, who I named, Sola means peace in Afghanistan. So when she was born, we were hoping that we would have a ceasefire because this war was personal. My cousins were in the Afghan National Security Forces and they would be coming back in coffins. Civilians would be killed, you know. And when Kabul fell, believe it or not, the first time Kabul fell in 2001, I was a translator with Abu Dhabi TV. The Americans were carrying airstrikes against the Taliban. And one morning I woke up at the Pearl Continental Hotel and Taliban were gone. And the Northern Lines took over, right? And it was very saddening again, 20 years down the line. I was doing live TV hits when I started getting phone calls from several corners of Kabul. In fact, my wife's, I know you're looking at your watch, so please stop me. Maybe I'm on Afghan minutes here.
You're doing fine.
Okay, good. So I got these WhatsApp messages, videos, in which you could see the Taliban had entered Kabul. And this was a remarkable comparison because in 2001, I was a translator. No one had smartphones. There was no WhatsApp. Forget about like videos and information flowing so fast. 20 years down the line, we were well ahead of the government, which had fled in essence. You know, Ashraf Ghani, President Ashraf Ghani, the former president, and others had fled or they were forced to flee. So I found the Taliban on my doorsteps because my next door neighbor, who had been hiding for 3 years as a neighbor, he was a Taliban intelligence guy. And I lived on a street with a lot of Afghan officials and others. So he came to my house. And I knew at that moment that my life was in danger, you know. But it was Middlebury College in the US, my college, my professors, the president of the college, as well as ABC News America, that got me onto the plane with the Qataris. You know, if it was not for ABC colleagues and many of my friends in the BBC and my college, my professors, I remember, and my college president, they were like working round the clock for 48 hours, nonstop, until we got to the airport. Remember, my daughter was very small, few months. My parents who are here with me, thanks God, they you know, my dad has Parkinson. And on the top of it, my face was known to the Taliban. So the airport was not very far. And that was the problem with that hasty withdrawal, because you had a generation of Afghans who would either work with the West or were seen working with the West or had a, you know, involvement. And now the Taliban knew exactly where each one lived, from cities to streets to, you know, businesses. So thanks God I got out in the end, but so many other people were not lucky. And then I think about 4 days after I arrived in Qatar, there was that suicide attack at the Abbey Gate at the airport, which was, you know, heartbreaking.
So it was through your professors and ABC News that would they have convinced Qatar to take you on?
It took more than convincing. It took all sorts of, I mean, that's why I'm very grateful to Middlebury, which will always be my home. I think they had to like, I remember Senator Bernie Sanders wrote me a letter, and many of these others, congressmen, because the college got me that. But they said, you have to take this letter and go to the airport. And I said, the problem is I can't go to the airport, you know, because it's just not possible. So they tried everything. And that's the one thing that you have to really give credit for so many people in the West who went out of their way on a personal level and evacuate Afghans, you know, which is why you have a big community here in Canada. I mean, I had always seen Canada from Vermont, right? Because that's where I was studying. So I made sure I went to Montreal when I came here to just see what the other side looked like. And I was lucky actually that the Canadians took me because I knew the ambassador and we would be invited to briefings. And this is why I think it is incredibly amazing that Canada has taken a big number of our colleagues from the media, from the civil society, and the government.
Let me just go back to my question. If it wasn't for those connections and this whole process of basically getting to the airport and getting on the plane, did you have a plan B? Could you have gone overland? Would you have gone into hiding? What do you think?
Not really, no. I mean, Afghanistan is a place where you really can't hide, and this is why I have written in my BBC News Online piece that this was a city, Kabul was a city, that I knew it inch by inch. But when the Taliban came, nowhere felt safe. I mean, it's a city of like, let's say, 7 to 8 million people. I could say that, right? But again, I had not thought over the last 2-3 years that I would make it out alive, because every day when we woke up, we would lose a colleague, female judges, prosecutors, and there was deep mistrust. The government could not protect you. Assassins were roaming in the streets of Kabul, and not to forget that you had regular suicide attacks, But I'm glad that I got out.
Yeah. Well, and we are too.
Thank you.
And with your family, that's amazing.
Thank you.
I want to ask you, over the last 18 years, there was a degree of freedom for women and a relative freedom of the press in this war zone. But will those 18 years force any kind of change under the Taliban, or will it go back to 2001?
Well, I mean, there's this wicked idea, right, that people keep talking about Taliban 2.0. And if the Taliban are anything, they are minus 1 point something, right? I mean, that the Taliban have not changed. We see that from their policies, right? Look at Afghanistan's Shia and Hazara minorities. How vulnerable they were, both under the Republic and both under the Islamic Emirate, right? Look at the issue of closing the gates for schools for girls, not allowing the Afghan women, right? I mean, these are all contradictions that are costing a generation of Afghans their futures and their lives, right? But honestly speaking, if you ask me, over the last 20 years, the Republic was not an island of perfection. It was a system run on corruption. It was a system that was run on death squads. It was a system that was run on deep prejudice. I mean, I'm not going to even go to ethnic issues here, If you are the president and your cousins would be ministers and governors and that kind of stuff, right? So to me, Afghanistan was not sustainable. At some stage, this would have collapsed. But what we had all hoped, that to make things better and to make Afghanistan sustainable, we should have a credible peace process, which we did not have. And people often forget that what happened in Doha was an exit deal between the Americans and between the Taliban. The Afghan government was never part of it. And when we look at the example of Colombia and many other countries, peace processes have certain ingredients. And here the key ingredients were missing. For example, there was no victim representation. There was none of that on all sides. So I wonder how long American airstrikes and billions of dollars could have kept a corrupt system going on. But I always tell people something else about Afghanistan. It was never an island of perfection. I mean, we come from a very painful past, not too distant, the Civil War, before that, the Russian invasion. So it was not realistic to just see the last 20 years as sort of the magic fix, And I would say this also, I hope this is like an appropriate saying here, I've said it before, that if Afghanistan was like a shrimp, our neighbors are like sharks. Whether they make love or fight, we get hurt. So the regional dynamics are always hurting us. That does not mean that we can park all the blame on the neighbors, right? But you can also not ignore that. For example, Pakistan was hosting the Taliban for 20 years. Their capabilities grew, They had sanctuaries, But on the ground in Afghanistan, the two things that I constantly witnessed, one was corruption, and the second was the issue of injustices. You had death squads under the Republic, these counterterrorism pursuit teams, CIA backed and funded, that were killing Afghans in cold blood. And we were kind of okay with that, actually, So now, what is the way ahead?
Yeah.
The Taliban are facing an insurgency from the Islamic State, but also from certain former government officials. And remember, the social changes. Even today, I was coming here, Afghan women were demonstrating on the streets of Kabul. That is not something that would have happened in 2002. So we will see if the Taliban will adjust to the realities. How sustainable are the Taliban themselves? Because now there are rivalries. There's power struggle between the Afghanis and the Southerners, And I don't want to speculate too much, but we also threw the Afghan women as a result of all these failed policies under the buses. When I call my uncle and he tells me his daughter cannot finish the medical education, that she was about to be a doctor, it breaks my heart. And I think that is as simple as it gets, that we basically failed. And also, let's not forget that there's that old saying, and I have to again, sorry if you've heard it before, the Taliban famously said, in Afghanistan, if the Americans had the watches, we have the time, right? Mm-hmm. I say, if we had focused on a credible peace process around 2010, when we had more leverage and that kind of stuff, we might have succeeded, right? But things changed quite quickly, and people also must remember that the Taliban have ministries of interior and defense where they have battalions for suicide attackers. So at some stage, we have to also hold the Taliban responsible and say, okay, if you're traveling to Gulf countries, if you have money, if you're business interest, these things are not okay. And I feel, as an Afghan, Keith, that we have set the bar very low on the Taliban right now. I think that can change.
Okay. That's a very good description of the current situation. And there's a grain of hope there in that, 50% of Afghanistan, 50% of the population are women, and they have been given a little bit of power. And so would you say there's hope there?
Well, I mean, again, the Afghan women are at the forefront of this fight, while everyone else has left. The Afghan women who are inside the country, and they're putting up a fight, right? There's a lot of pressure. Look, in 2001, no one could stand up to a Talib. I remember it when I was covering them. Today, you have Afghans with mobiles documenting things. You have demonstrations. You have all sorts of pressure. And I would like to think that, while we have all taken our eyes off Afghanistan and with the tragedy in Ukraine and everything, we need to be very mindful that the only solution in Afghanistan is a negotiated settlement, a fair one, right? But that's now on the Taliban. The responsibility is on the Taliban. And this is why when certain Western governments or institutions go easy on the Taliban, I think they do great injustice, not to their own values, but also to the Afghan women and to Afghanistan.
Right. Let me open this up. Is there anyone with questions? We have a couple minutes left with Bilal. Does anyone have a question? Yes, there's a hand at the back.
What's the situation?
Sorry, can you tell me your name, please?
My name is Alfred. I live here. I have a question about any communication line with any journalists in Afghanistan right now. Is there any sort of communication line, or is that all controlled 100% by the Taliban, or is there like an underground thing that's happening?
Well, I mean, I speak to our colleagues, I speak to a lot of the people still, including the Taliban, which is unbelievable because, that has changed now. But our colleagues have had restrictions. For example, colleagues who are in South or West or North, without me giving you specifics, they have been given an 11-point by the Taliban, things that they cannot do, which is literally a big no-no, in the world of journalism. So Taliban, one thing that they're doing, they are controlling the narrative. Second thing that we've had a lot of cases, Taliban soldiers and intelligence people have gone into newsrooms and they have beaten our colleagues. They have jailed them. There's been a lot of these cases. So it's very difficult, in terms of reporting. And sometimes I get it wrong because we have to rely on citizen journalism. We have to find ways to verify things. We've made mistakes, but that's a new reality. Tolo TV, Afghanistan's largest television station, I believe has kept a fight. They have compromised on certain things. Obviously, that's understandable, but they are still there. And I wonder how long will they allow Tolo and others before they shut them.
Okay. Well, we've kind of run out of time, unfortunately.
Sorry,
I find this, no, not at all.
I forgot the name of Holly who helped me with the reading.
Oh, Annalie?
Yeah.
Annalie?
I want to thank Annalie, she's here somewhere, for teaching me actually how to read. That's one thing that, I've done all sorts of things. So thank you very much for being patient with me. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Bilal. The next reader, we're going to do by Zoom. She is currently in Vancouver. And her name is Ava Homa. And Anthony, she's standing by.
In a moment. I'm just gonna set the projector up.
Okay. And I'm going to come and sit there so we can see the. She'll be projected on the screen behind me, and hopefully the sound and everything will work well.
Thank you.
Just bear with us here. We're getting close. While we're waiting, I could do the introduction to Ava. Ava Homa is a journalist and award-winning author of Daughters of Smoke and Fire, a novel that won the 2020 Nautilus Book Award. She holds an MA in English and Creative Writing from the University of Windsor and an MA in English Language and Literature from Tehran, Iran. Ava has spoken about women's rights across North America and Europe. Her words have appeared in the Globe and Mail, the BBC, and the Guardian. She has addressed the UN and European forums on the struggle of Kurdish women in their search for justice and freedom. and the act of writing, as resistance. She'll be reading from Daughters of Smoke and Fire, and also from her new novel, Silence Between the Notes. So, Ava, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
What a
Can you
pleasure
hear
to
me?
see you. It's really, we've been communicating back and forth, and I'm delighted to see your face and hear your voice.
Thank you for inviting me, Keith, and for all the support that you have been offering throughout leading to today. I'm also indebted to so many people in up in Canada, Writers in Exile, for all their heartfelt support. Really happy to be speaking to all of you today. As Keith mentioned, I'll be reading a short excerpt of Daughters of Smoke and Fire. What's special is that what I'll be reading for you today, I've never read in public before. It reassures me that today's audience are very special and they can take what I'm here to offer you with. I've heard you guys have a lot of curiosity and openness and compassion.
Yes, thank you.
And just two words in Bapir that you will hear is in Kurdish means grandpa. And there's a breakfast sandwich to talk about here, which is something I was fed when I was a kid. We called it a bulletproof sandwich, which was basically just honey and ghee, and ghee is clarified butter. I didn't question it as a kid, why we had to have a sandwich that's called bulletproof, and how and why that would make us run faster than the bullets. But now in the safety of Canada, I look back at it and I'm reminded of what a compassionate way to prepare a kid for the world that he enters. So this is the story. When his grandpa drew a yogurt mustache above Alan's lips, the boy dissolved into giggles. Picturing himself with real whiskers thrilled Alan, who thought that facial hair might make up for being shorter than the other boys in his class. Your laughter woke me up, you cheeky monkey. Uncle Soran, youngest of the 6 uncles and the only one awake, puzzled Alan's hair as he came onto the patio that opened to the yard. They sat around an island cloth spread atop the crimson handmade rug to eat breakfast. Alan laughed again. Bapir, I want handlebars, please. With a chapped finger, Bapir curled the end of the yogurt mustache on either side of Alan's puckered up lips and planted a dab of the stuff on his nose too. Alan collapsed into laughter. That June morning in 1963, Alan decided that Bapir was the most amusing person on earth. Grandma brought out more naan, the thin, round bread she had baked in the cylindrical clay oven dug into the basement. Alan made his own bulletproof sandwich, fresh honeycomb mixed with ghee. After I eat this, I can run faster than the bullets, he said. Father had come to Soleimani to publish an article he had written with Uncle Soran, illustrating the suffering of the working class in Kurdistan and the rest of Iraq. Kurds had settled in the Zakros Mountains 300 years before Christ was born, but now Alan's people had no country to call their own. When the Western allies had drawn the map of the Middle East, they had cut Kurdistan into 4 pieces, dividing it among Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria. To visit Bapir with his father, Alan had to ace Kurdish spelling, but Kurdish was not a subject taught at school. Arabic was the only language used there. That morning, father had skipped breakfast to search the city for a contraband typewriter. Across the yard, Grandma was watering the pink roses and white lilies. A pounding on the wooden gate in the cement wall that surrounded the plot of land shattered her concentration. She dropped the hose. I'll get it. Alan ran across the yard to save her the trouble, but before he reached the gate, 6 men in Iraqi army uniforms, their faces hidden by a striped gray scarf, broke the lock and directed their Kalashnikovs at Grandma's face. Where are they? The shortest one demanded. Bapir froze, a morsel of food still in his open mouth. Alan turned to see Uncle Soran leaping over the wall and clambering onto the neighbor's roof. Somebody, Grandma, grabbed Alan and backed him toward the house. Nestled against her bosom, Alan watched the soldiers invade the house without waiting for an answer. All 6 uncles were pulled from their beds and hauled from the bathroom, the basement, a closet, and off the roof next door. Alan wiped off his white handlebars with his sleeve and tried to make sense of the chaos, the jerky movements, the incomprehensible noises escaping people's throats. If only his eyes would give him weapons instead of tears. His uncles were dragged by their necks, screaming and struggling like animals to slaughter. Bapir's questions and prayers, Grandma's cries and pleas, the neighbors' screams and curses, nothing had the slightest effect on the soldiers who conducted the raid without a reply. Alan's uncles, some still in undershirts, were marched out at gunpoint to army truck carrying hundreds of Kurdish boys and men between the ages of 14 and 25. Alan peeled himself from Grandma's arms and ran to the street. The men were told to squat in the beds of the trucks, to place their hands on their heads, and to shut their mouth. Alan looked back at Bapir, who remained next to his smashed gate, heads bowed. Along with other children, women, and elderly, Alan chased after the lumbering trucks, their huge rubber tires kicking up clouds of dust as they carted away the men amid the anxious cries of the followers. Alan trailed after the truck carrying his uncles as it traveled up the hillside at the city center. His heart had never beaten so fast. The truck finally stopped at the top of the hill and prisoners were shoved out. On the hard soil, the captives were each given a shovel and ordered to dig. The angry bystanders were ordered to stand back. People obeyed the AK-47s. Dirt sprayed over the prisoners' bodies, hairs, and eyelashes as their shovels cracked the earth open. Sweat dripped down their faces and tears ran down over hands that muffled sobs. Alan looked at the pea running down the pants of a boy next to him, at a woman behind him, clawing at her face and calling out, God, 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 God. At an older man, shaking uncontrollably, his hands barely holding onto his cane. Alan did not seem to be in possession of his own frozen body. Once the trenches were dug, half of the prisoners were ordered to climb down into the ditches, and the rest were forced to shovel dirt to their friends' and relatives' chins. Alan searched through the crowd to find Uncle Soran lifting a pile of dirt with his shovel. Soran's grip loosened when he looked into the eyes of his brother, Hiwa, whose name meant hope. Hiwa stood in the hole waiting to be buried by his closest relative, a man with whom he had play wrestled as a boy and confided in throughout his life. Do it, Soran, do it, he said, his eyes shining up from the hole. A bearded soldier dressed in camouflage saw Soran's hesitation. Dog, son of a dog, he barked and swung his Kalashnikov at Soran, the barrel slicing the skin under his left ear. Soran growled, almost choking, as he turned. With his shovel, he batted the Kalashnikov away so that the gun hit its owner in the head, cutting his skull. Alan flinched. Bullets rained down from every direction. Soran crumbled. His blood sprayed over Hiwa, who was screaming and reaching for the perforated body, pulling him forward, pressing his face to the bleeding cheek of his brother. Crying out, Bapir tried to run toward his son, but Dozens of guns pointed at his chest, dozens of hands held him back. The shower of gunfire wouldn't cease. It struck the siblings, painting them and the soil around them red. His uncles, still in one another's arm, were buried in one hole. Half of the prisoners were still covered up to their chins with dirt. The remaining 95 men were sent down into the other trenches, and the soldiers buried them up to their head. Alan stared at the rows upon rows of human heads, a garden of agony. Intoxicated with power, the soldiers kicked the exposed heads of the prisoners, knocked some with the butts of their guns, and jeered at them. At the top of the hill, Bakir sobbed with such force that his wails shook the earth. Alan felt. He clutched Bakir's hunched shoulder and felt impossibly small. The sunburned man and a neighbor with shrunken features hugged Bakir, then placed the old man's trembling arms around their shoulders and walked him down the hill. "Where are my other sons?" Bakir gasped for air. "Let's get you home," the neighbors told him. Alan wanted to go with his grandpa, but he was afraid to move. If he took a step, the nightmares would become real. He scanned the hill for his other uncles, who were perhaps buried in some distant trench and unable to move. He couldn't see them. Even Bakir was no longer in sight. The hubbub was dying down. The strangers who had witnessed the scene were bound by their dread, their exchanged looks, the only solace they could offer each other. Their heads seemed to move in slow motion, as if everyone was suspended underwater. Alan breathed in the atmosphere of quiet horror, of paused hysteria. Suddenly, people cried out in terror. From the road below them, several armored tanks were approaching. Gaping in disbelief, Alan staggered back, holding a hand to his mouth. He could neither run away nor slow his hammering heart, which was now threatening to explode. When the panicking crowd pushed forward, guns fired into the air to hold them back. The tanks advanced. Thank you for listening. So, the rest of the story.
Yes, go on.
So the rest of the story is in Daughters of Smoke and Fire. This is the cover. HarperCollins Canada did a really good job of designing it and giving a very beautiful book out. For those of you who love to travel and see the rest of the world and feel like Iran and Kurdistan is not a place that's easily accessible for you, this will be one way for you to travel and feel the scenes and the sense. It's not all horror, of course. This was, like I said, the most difficult few pages of the book, but I hope it will give you a chance to understand the complexity of life in Iran, the protests, the morality police, the women movement, and so much more that people have been showing a curiosity to understand, but they don't necessarily have access to.
Thank you so much for that, Ala. I do have to ask the question: are your passages based on true events?
Yes, every detail in the book, every detail, from what the radio announces, what the TV show might face, what the character might see on the street, all of them are based on historically correct research. So you can trust the event. The characters are fictional, but the events are true.
Kurdistan, after World War I, was divided up. The Kurds were not given a homeland. They were divided up between, is it Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. Has there, in the last year or two, even been any kind of improvement in the negotiations between the Kurds and those four governments?
Well, a lot has changed since the First World War. In the beginning, as humanity moved into the age of nation states from having empires, and Kurds were denied what the other groups in the Middle East, namely Arabs, Turks, and Persian had. Kurds were denied a state of their own. So the idea initially was, if we do have our own country, we would be safe from oppression. But 100 years from that time, and with the impossibility of fighting four powerful states at once, Kurds have come to this practical sense of trying to work within the borders of the places they live in. And so I think that the improvement is that Kurds realize having a state is a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. What they want is equality and justice, and not necessarily exchanging a Persian dictator with a Kurdish dictator. The dream of having an independent state is not completely dead, but it's not practical, and more people come to realize that. In the context of Iran specifically, after this protest, Kurds have been willing to work with the rest of Iran in bringing democracy and justice to their country, and asking for autonomy more than independence.
I found on reading the portion of your new novel that it complements this. As horrible, horrific, and brutal as the passage was, this new novel offers an insight. It's an excellent continuation, if you will, complement. I'm wondering if you are ready to go and to read the rest. Read from
Thank you.
the new novel.
Yes, I'll be happy to share a couple pages from Silence Between the Notes, which is a novel I have completed. I think in a couple weeks, I'll be ready to look for literary representations. And I'm happy for this chance to share again one thing that I have never shared in public before. So Connie is a musician. This one is set in America because I wanted to look at the relationships between basically the effects of US foreign policy on the Kurdish experience. Connie is a young woman, a Yazidi survivor of ISIS kidnapping, and she lives and works in California. Connie once stood tall as an individual and a member of her tribe, green and golden, like the meadows and mountains of her faraway homeland. She danced like a whirling dervish with her hands up to the sky, golden ribbons shimmering on her chestnut pigtails. She grew up chasing butterflies among the wildflowers of Mount Shingal and climbing the ancient fig and walnut trees of her front yard. Her ancestors loved their land and were nurtured by it, century after century, until the war. Ever since the highlands of her life turned into dust 5 years ago, she had been only a fraction of a human, endlessly reinventing her colors according to her surroundings, camouflaging like her favorite octopus at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, where she now worked. Gone were the flirtatious wings in her dark blue eyes, the genuine smile on her lips, the subtle sway in her hip. The sun sauntered down the Monterey Bay Peninsula in March 2019, showering the clouds with shades of purple, amusing the guests on the patio of the Mirage Hotel restaurant. Connie collected the tip her last customer had left on the table and did the math. She needed $275 by the end of the week to pay her rent. A tap on her shoulder. "Table 29 asked for you," said John, the restaurant manager who wore too much cologne. He left quickly to say something to the new and anxious server who still had a lot to learn. Hired for her body, denied training, and humiliated for her lack of skills. Connie knew the drill. She had been through it. She took a deep breath and counted to 9 as she let go of the stagnant air she had been holding. 29 of her family members had been killed. Table 29 demanded her service. She turned 29 last week. The man who had asked for her wasn't a regular. He was in his late 60s and had reserved the best view, but his back was to the ocean. The clientele of this posh restaurant, seemingly from all over the world, had one thing in common: residency in the exclusive country of wealth. The odd patterns of this man's old-fashioned suit, however, made him look like an expatriate, craving a taste of his former life, longing to prove that he used to be somebody. Connie knew that urge only too well. After some chit-chat, he asked, "So, where's that accent from? You're European? Russian?" Connie's shoulders slumped. The usual request, to draw her limits and borders, to squeeze herself into boxes that lethargic minds demanded to classify humans like they'd organize a closet based on color and utility. How would they categorize a stateless Yazidi without asking for a history lesson anyway? She waved a hand. "Oh, what difference does it make?" He reclined and chewed gum, trying too hard to look chill. "Your model? 'Cause you could be. Easier than this, better pay." His pink face and damp hair showed off his spotted, which in this hotel cost more than Connie's bi-weekly paycheck. That's funny. She mustered a smile, but her eyes refused to cooperate. He let out clipped cackles. His eyes were broken-hearted, or lonely, or both. "I'm serious, you must be 22, 24 months, and 5'8". His appraising eyes incised Connie's nerves. The sky cried blood as the sun disappeared behind the ocean. She shifted on her feet and played with her fake diamond ring, swallowing her barks. If only she didn't need the tips. "Would you like to start with a drink?" He looked the menu up and down. "How's that cocktail? The Big Little Lies?" "Seasoned." She clasped her hands behind her apron. "One of our most popular. Any appetizers?" He leaned in, refusing to give up. "So you're not a model?" "Absolutely not." Rage struck her chest like a thunderstorm. Her body was hers, no longer for sale. "Ah, you must have been born to a model then." He raised a finger, proud of solving his own puzzle. She reached inside her pocket and squeezed the small black stone she had brought all the way from home. Feeling the soft surface of the stone against its firmness helped her to not lash out. "Oh, look, right behind you, a bunch of seals are jumping up." He turned for a moment. The lotions from his facial treatment were stuck between the wrinkles of his neck. In a blink, his eyes were drilling into her again. "I could hook you up with a modeling agency." "I'll be back with your cocktail shortly." "Wait, let's have a photo." His foot hit the table leg with a thud. To avoid breaking a plate on his brainless head, she picked up her pace and sought shelter at the server's corner. The small back room with fluorescent strip lights were filled with piles of trays and silverware that had to be polished. Connie placed her cheek and hand on the cold window and stared at the gentle waves, taking in the ocean so she'd feel balanced again. Her sigh blurred her vision. "Forget about your table," John texted. "Do not come back on the patio." "What happened?" she wrote back. No answer. The familiar stern darkness pressed down on her chest. Gosh, not again, not now. She needed to be in her best mood tonight and offer very big smiles. Seasoned at tackling anxiety, Connie closed her eyes and summoned her missing fiancé, Kayvon. "I know about everything that hurts, darling," he whispered. "But tell me, what do you love?" That's what they'd ask each other at stressful time. "How about right now? What do you love right this moment?" There was always an answer, often several. She listened to the farthest sounds. "I love the whooshing sound of the waves when they retreat on the pebbles. Do you hear it?" John opened the door. "You can go home now. We'll talk later." "What? Why? No." She had been hired as a hostess 3 years ago when she was new in the US and was promoted before she was ready. English still ice-like in her mouth, despite years of speaking it. She had many hiccups in the beginning, but John had announced only last month that Connie was one of his top servers. John put on an authoritarian face like a see-through mask. That customer of yours made a scene. She clenched her apron. Well, my job description didn't say I'm gonna take photos of creeps. He complained he didn't understand your accent. Nonsense. Connie knew well what it was all about. Sounding like a refugee while looking like a model had betrayed his fetish. You can stand at the hostess desk, that's all I can offer. But that meagerly hour rate would not pay her bills. Only tonight? We'll have to see, I can't promise anything. Really, John? You demote me because of a racist prick? I'm running a business here, not a charity, all right? A charity. A charity. She took off her apron and threw it at the indifferent wall. This is not even justice, let alone charity. Because if his country had not backstabbed hers, she wouldn't have ended up waiting on bigots. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Robert. I think I'd like to open it up now and ask if anyone has any questions. Is there anyone with thoughts, comments, or questions? Give you a moment here to think. Quite a contrast between Iran and Southern California. But
Yes, I guess I've been trying to look at intergenerational trauma and displacement, trying to build a new life in North America, and a lot of insensitivity that you come across while trying to do that.
yes, yes. Yes, we have a question here,
It's Mary.
Mary.
How has your life been since you've made a new home in Canada? Because this must be a very poignant experience, both writing about intergenerational trauma and possibly, I don't want to presume, but maybe having experienced it yourself.
How has my life been since I am living in Canada?
Yes.
How much time do we have? It's been healing. It's been healing. If I were to say it in one word, Canada gave me the peace that allowed me to question and examine things that I couldn't when I was in Iran, because while I was there, all I did was to survive. And once you're no longer just surviving, then comes a chance to grow, to examine, to expand, to heal, to help others along the way. That is a little bit of generalization, because even within an oppressive society, because I'm a little bit wary of representation of the Middle East, which is either demonization or complete romanticization. And what I try to offer in Daughters of Smoke and Fire is something that's realistic and in between, because there's a lot between these two ways of presenting life in Iran. Even then, despite everything, there's a lot of joy, there's growth. I often say that with grief comes a depth of soul that's rare in this world. In communities like the community that I grew up as a Kurd in Iran, there's a lot of, a very strong sense of community, a lot of compassion, and a very strong sense of taking care of each other. Here, there is a strong sense of self-care, but I feel like we're missing in that sense of let's take care of each other. So dealing with trauma, whether it's intergenerational or it's something that's developed in your own life, is its own story. But if we put that aside, because I see even people in the safety of North America, they develop all sorts of trauma. I often think of my experience at living in the east and the west side of the planet as having had access to left and right side of collective human brain. And I want to remind us that East also has a lot to offer in terms of flavor, beauty, depth, poetry, and all of that. And we will have a beautiful world if we could take the safety and practicality and efficiency of the West to the East and take the collective culture and the kindness and the flavors of the East back here. So that's what my dream is for humanity.
Thank you.
I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did.
Yes, you
Thank you
did.
beautifully.
Thank you so much. That was a beautiful way to end. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but this was terrific. Thank you very much for your time and your work, and we loved it. So
Thank you. I really appreciate you listening. Once again, Daughters of Smoke and Fire is available as ebook, audiobook. It's at all the libraries across Toronto and in your favorite bookstores. I hope you'll pick up your copy and travel to Iran through this book.
thank you very much. Bye. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a short break before the next two writers. So I think we have pizza and we have some wonderful HIRUT Ethiopian cuisine, just some snacks. Say again? Dumplings. Really, today they have dumplings. Yes. Yes. So if you would go and take the food from the bar and bring it back to your tables, if you would like some, and then we'll continue on with the readings.
Ramadan Kareem.
Ramadan Kareem. Yeah, no, we have to be somewhere else. Another time. We live in this side. So we will come back. Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness, you were so
You helped me so much. Thank you. I hope you are safe.
very happy, very happy.
So I took notes, but I didn't write anything. So I got a thumb to print me some new ones, and I was like, wow.
I know, and it was like, sometimes I don't care. Okay.
بعد ذلك كركرت ساكن كركرت تبكين سنة والله كنا بيتيم سنة خبري ونظام سنة كبار
I know, but it's okay. 3 more hours and then we'll be done. Yes, please. Okay. There's a very popular Afghan, Canadian Afghan filmmaker, and she recently produced a big film, I Still Sing. She's Afghan Canadian and won some awards. Yeah, it's about like the story of this, like an Afghan idol type stuff, like, you know, yeah, that kind of stuff. You know, I've worked on documentaries, but I haven't done anything like this. That would be good, but no, it's not an area. It's not an area of expertise. Honestly speaking. What is your name? Hi. Who do you work with? Nice, very nice. That'd be good, but no, that's not. I mean, it's wonderful area, but that's not where my expertise are. Thank you so much. Thank you for all of your help. Thank you. Well, when Kid reached out to me, he's another colleague. So I was going every day to Starbucks to like practice. It came out well. Very helpful. And now we're waiting for the publication, right? It's gonna be like in the end of the year. Summer, yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. It's okay. We'll wait for a few more hours. Thank you.
Well, you know, I
Yeah. Well, they have the best Ramadan, the Emiratis. I love it.
They would have these big sheets.
Thank you. Mama yana da zuma da rik malbar da sai tweet kare malbar kuma amla kare shi kare Marbun लिखने चाहिए ऐसे चीजों में मुतासिर सरे लगे तो मंगा हाथ Yunat na yaro adin alak kila fi nazar. Bisa ga wuga na dole su bana fadi. دول أسبان فاتيو.
والله زبالة فاتي تشيكي وهذا آخر ولا ورا؟
دول أسبان ليش لا تسوي شيء.
أنا دخيل بخرجون زي كتار خارج من كون ودخلت الزبالة فاتي زرانجو.
يبغى سامي شيء. بيمسح دول. أنا نجيب فري. ليش يبغى ما نجيب زي فري. من فري ما كان.
I think you might be at the end of it.
Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have to start up in a minute or two. So if you could get your food, procure your victuals, and return to your table if you would, please. Okay, 2-minute warning, please, and we're going to begin again. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, and I hope you've enjoyed the Ethiopian taste of Ethiopia and the pizza. Yes, a couple of items of housekeeping. We do have a collection jar, which will go back to the Writers in Exile, Penn Canada Writers in Exile, for our various functions and expenses. So if you wanted to leave a donation, that would be great. And Mary here has brought a bunch of New Yorker magazines.
If you're learning English, read good English.
Apparently, you can get good English in the New Yorker, and so they're sitting there waiting for anyone who wants them. Thank you, Mary. We do have to move along because we have Danny Barnes and a number of other excellent musicians doing a show tonight. Yeah, I just did about the contributions. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, this is the tip jar, which if you want to make a donation, will be here by the door. Thank you, Hannah. And yes, I was saying about Danny Barnes, wonderful musician. They're doing a thing tonight, a combination of Israeli and Ethiopian jazz, which sounds like a very interesting combination, and they're terrific musicians. It's such a great little bar, HIRUT, with excellent food and very warm hosts. So if you don't stay tonight, maybe make a plan to come back here again, because the music is always great. I'd like to introduce the next reader. So I will ask John to come up, John Junaid of Myanmar. John Junaid is a Rohingya from Myanmar and a passionate journalist, human rights activist, refugee advocate, and survivor of the genocide against the Rohingya minority in Myanmar. Hoping to get to Australia, he fled to Malaysia and then Indonesia, where he was interned in the notorious Makassar detention camp. for asylum seekers. There he organized protests across Indonesia that eventually led to improved conditions in those camps. Through sponsorship, he was able to resettle in Canada. John is a member of Northern Lights Canada, which advocates for refugees and displaced people. John is studying journalism at Mohawk College in Hamilton. So welcome, John.
Thank you, sir.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And you'll be reading from Voices of the Forgotten.
So, before I start reading, I would like to play a little game with you all, if that's okay.
Okay, if we could have someone quiet, please.
Okay, so I would ask everyone to make a fist like this. And then try to hold your ring finger up. Put your fist on somewhere. And try to put your ring finger up. Can you do that? Can you do that? The ring finger.
The ring one.
The ring one? Yeah, this one. The ring one.
Like here. Can you pull it out? No,
It is very easy.
it's not easy, right? Is it possible to leave it out? If you put on the table your face, it's kind of difficult, right? Yeah, but if it's a middle finger, you can pull it up. But so these fingers kind of relate to my stories as a journalist, as an activist, and that's how I have been for 10 years under the pressure of the authorities and the immigrations and all kind of agencies that are related to helping refugees and displaced people in Asia. So I spent my last 10 years under these pressures. And I was once forgotten. Now, the Canada has made my recommendations and given me new life. So this is the story I'm going to read. Voices of the Forgotten, a Rohingya refugees' journey to activism. Yeah. Adrift in the middle of international waters, I watched in despair as my broken down boat sank slowly, taking with it the hopes and dreams of those on board. People were fighting for life jackets while I lay at the back of the boat, praying and remembering my mother and all those back home. As the night descended and the big ship passed us by, I prepared to meet my fate, but the fate had other plans. The morning sun brought with it a glimmer of hope. As I wake up to the sight of towering mountains, my journey had not ended. I was filled with gratitude for Australian Navy, who had rescued us from the brink of disaster. However, my trials were far from over as they towed us back to Indonesia, where I found myself locked up in a hotel by the Indonesian immigration officers, only to witness the brutal beatings and eventual death of a fellow Rohingya refugee. Three months later, I was then transferred to a bigger prison. When I entered the detention center in Manado, Indonesia, I was overwhelmed by the towering walls and electric fences. My heart was heavy with fear as I saw 100 more other prisoners whose life had been altered by the forces beyond their control. The immigration officers confiscated my money and phones. I was disheartened by the sight of hundreds of people waiting in the cells. At 19 years of age, I was now a captive, accused of a crime for fleeing violence from Myanmar, in charge of safety and freedom. Growing up as a Rohingya Muslim in Myanmar, I had always felt like an outsider. I was constantly bullied and labeled as Kallar or illegal immigrants in my own country. The government, who denies the existence of a Rohingya ethnic group, consider us illegal or Bengali, therefore stateless, leading to daily discrimination, prosecution. In 2012, anti-Rohingya violence had escalated, leading to the loss of close friends, relatives, and forcing me to flee to Bangladesh. However, safety eluded me as I was constantly on the run, moving from India to China and finally attempting to reach Australia. But my journey didn't end there, as I was arrested and sent back to Indonesia, where I was imprisoned, denied my basic rights in a life of hopeless limbo. As time marched on, hope began to die for refugees in Indonesia. At least 15 of them have taken their own lives, unable to bear the weight of despair. Meanwhile, hundreds more are left to suffer in mental institutions or physically impacted by the stress of their situations. I was one of them, trapped in this green hell. We call it green hell. I couldn't bear to see injustice any longer. I reached out to organizations like UNHCR, Amnesty International, but my letters were all unanswered. I even sought help from human rights groups, lawyers, only to be met with fear and reluctance to get involved. But I refuse to be silenced. My journey as a refugee in Indonesia led me to become a journalist and activist, using my voice to shed light on the injustice faced by those like me. I had never imagined this path for myself, but the severity of our situation demanded it. And the more I uncover, the more I realize the true extent of mistreatment faced by refugees. I remember it like it was yesterday. The first protest we held in front of a UNHCR office in Indonesia. As a member of a group of 50 refugees, I was determined to make our voices heard. The protest caused quite a commotion, with traffic being disrupted and the media taking notice of our cause. Over the following months, we continued to protest, but our efforts were met with disappointment. None of our demands were met. Things were increasingly becoming difficult for us. Some of my fellow protesters were arrested, and I soon became the main target of the police. I was constantly on the run, hiding from the authorities. In an effort to keep the cause alive, I turned to social media, using my rating to share the stories of my fellow refugees. I wanted to investigate the Australian and Indonesian refugee policies. So I enrolled online courses to improve my journalism skills. That's when I met Kieran Cabas, an Australian writer who wanted to work with refugees like me on a writing project. He became my guide, editing my stories, helping me publish them in international media such as Al Jazeera, BBC Indonesia, and CBC News. As I gained recognitions as a journalist and activist, my life became even more difficult. Threats were being made against me, wanting me to stop my activism or face imprisonment. As an engaged refugee, I had always felt a strong urge to make my voice heard. I could no longer stand by and watch the Indonesian government and NGOs ignore the rights of refugees like me. So I rallied a group of like-minded individuals, and together we organized the largest protest Indonesia had ever seen. Our demonstration echoed throughout the cities across the country, drawing attention to the injustice we face every day. The day of the protest, a government spokesperson was sent to meet us. He asked, "What do refugees want from Indonesia?" And I stood up, determined to make our voices heard. "What have you done for us besides supporting Australia's current deterrence policies? We are human beings. We demand our human rights." But the representatives was not receptive to our pleas. He informed us that Indonesia was not bound by the UN Refugee Conventions and that we could either stay or leave the country. But if you continue to protest, you will face harsh measure, he said. The meeting only intensified the pressure on me as I refused to back down from the protests. I was told that I could no longer stay in Indonesia if I continued to speak out and write about the immigration and the government. Just as when I thought all the hope was lost, a glimmer of light appeared. My friend Stephen, a Canadian refugee advocate, is there, reached out to me with good news. He had found sponsors to resettle me in Canada. I was overwhelmed with gratitude, and my heart filled with hopes for a brighter future. But then, as I sat in my small room in Makassar, I couldn't help but feel hopeless. It was still 1 year away from my resettlement to Canada, but it felt like eternity. Little did I know that my fate would change in just a matter of hours. In the middle of the night, the authorities arrested me and interrogated me until morning. They presented me with two options: go to jail or leave Makassar. I chose the latter, to leave Makassar, but it came with a cost. I would no longer receive accommodation from IOM, International Organization for Migrants, or a monthly allowance. I eventually found myself in Jakarta, but as I waited for my application to be processed, I was met with another harsh reality in Jakarta. In Jakarta, I saw refugees begging for help on the street in front of UNHCR offices. With no shelter, excluded from basic human rights and services. I wrote articles which endangered my safety, always on the move, always in hiding. When the pandemic hit, the Canadian immigration authorities postponed the processing of applications, thus delaying my resettlement. But the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh were already facing a decade-long crisis, to which a solution is still unknown, and they are still in search of safety. Then two boats carrying almost 300 passengers landed in Aceh. Aceh is in Indonesia. I was then hired by the UNHCR as an interpreter. But their situation was so dire that I could not do anything about it. I then published an article on BBC News to find help for them, which caused my employer to want me to stop writing. I left the job, and to my surprise, Canada opened its border, and my resettlement application resumed. In the meantime, the international community has started to pay attention to the situations of refugees in Indonesia. I was invited to speak at various human rights conferences, where I shared my story and the stories of those who were left behind in the detention centers. With the support of international organizations and media outlets, I was able to shed light on the mistreatments of refugees and the lack of access to their basic human rights in Indonesia. Eventually, Indonesian government was forced to address the issue, and several policies were put in place to improve the treatments of refugees. The detention centers were reformed, and the refugees were given access to better healthcare and education. Our voices had finally begun to be heard, and the world began to understand the struggle of those who had been once forgotten for too long. On September 30, 2021, I finally arrived in Canada. And I was warmly welcomed by my sponsor team at the Toronto airport. Joel Freeman and Julie Brels, who treated me like family, hosted me during my quarantine. I finally took a long walk to Toronto's lakeshore and feel the freedom of fresh air. April was a life-changing moment for me. I finally received my permanent resident card. It was a passport to a new world of possibilities. I could study, I could work, access healthcare, even become a citizen in the future. Since then, my life had been busy. I had made a lot of friends, and I'm always on the go. But the best part of my new life in Canada has been meeting Stephen. He is more than just a friend. He has been my rock through thick and thin. Whenever I face a challenge, he's there to help me overcome it. And he knows how to have fun too. He hosts an epic party for all the former refugees he has helped sponsor. For us, it's a chance to let loose, forget about the past, embrace our new lives in Canada. Natasha, over there, she is more than just another sponsor. She has taken me under her wings and become my mentor, helping me navigate my new life in Canada, showing me the way to brighter futures. Thanks to her guidance, I'm settling well and making the most of everything this amazing country has to offer. Although I'm grateful for this new life, there is still heavy weight on my heart. Every day, I think about the people I left behind and the ones who are still stuck in refugee camps and detention centers around the world. It is hard to enjoy this new life when I know that they are still suffering. They are wasting away without hope or dreams. Sometimes I feel guilty for being here while they are still trapped in these horrible places. I pray for them every day, hoping that someday they will be able to escape and find a better life like I did. But until then, my happiness will always be tinged with sadness, knowing that there are still so many people out there who are desperate for a chance to live in peace and freedom. In conclusion, my journey as a Rohingya refugee had been filled with trials and hardship, but it's also led me to become a voice for a change. My activism allowed me to empower others and bring about a shift in the way refugees are perceived and treated. I may have lost my home, but I gained a purpose, a community, and a voice to fight for future. The fight may not be over, but my journey had just begun. And I am ready to face whatever comes my way with courage, determination, and a strong will to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much. There are many people here that don't know a lot about the Rohingya people. And I thought I'd ask you, could you briefly describe the culture, history, the religion of the Rohingya people?
Rohingyas are a group of ethnic indigenous people in Myanmar. They live in northern state of Rakhine State, which is border with Bangladesh, and I am one of the Rohingyas. Rohingya is an ethnic group that have been subjected to genocide for generations and after generations. We grew up as a Rohingya in our own country with no recognitions of our existence. We are categorized as illegal immigrants in our own land. Growing up as a Rohingya in Myanmar, I never had my own identity as a citizen or a person who belonged to this country. In 1982, the military government has cancelled our citizenship and labeled us illegal immigrants who illegally crossed the border from Bangladesh to to Myanmar. But we were not illegal in our own land. We had a kingdom of our own country. Our country was called Arakan, and we didn't belong to Myanmar or Bangladesh. We had our own country. But when the British came in, they took over the whole part of Myanmar, including our land, and make it as one country. And then the Burmese government took over the power, the military junta, and they were separating the land, recognizing all the state in Burma, and then they had this, discriminating policies toward the Muslims and also the Rohingyas, that they are not a part of Myanmar. So we had since become illegal immigrants in our own country. So what it feels like to grow up as an illegal immigrants in your own country is that you have no basic right. If I was able to go to school and university, that's because I grew up in a city, but in many villages, there were no, school for Rohingyans. So we were like, living in our own country without any basic right. We have, trouble instruction. Yeah, so our life is like living in open prison in Rakhine State.
Well, thank you for explaining that. Well, this was all very revealing. I appreciate you sharing your experiences with us, and appreciate you being here. And I feel enlightened by what you've told us. So I wish you the best for the future. And I'm glad that you found some peace here in Canada. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would like to invite our last reader to step forward, Luis Horacio Najera of Mexico.
How are you? Thank you. Hello, how are you?
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes. Buenos días, buenas noches, depending where you are.
Luis Horacio Najera is an acclaimed award-winning journalist, crime analyst, and former reporter for Mexico's Grupo Reforma. His life was repeatedly threatened for his reports on the corruption and drug cartels along the U.S.-Mexico border. He has escaped to Canada in 2008. Luis won the 2010 CJFE International Press Freedom Award and is a former fellow at the Citizen Lab Canada Centre for Global Security Studies and the co-author of Wolfpack. Despite his successes, Najera still struggles with unemployment. So he'll be reading from the Wolfpack, which is a very impressive book about the cartels and the long arm of the cartels reaching indeed into Canada, in Vancouver and Toronto and so on. I was fascinated with the revelations in that book. So thank you for that. And I'll let you do your excerpt, and then we'll have a couple of questions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you all for being here. It's very it's fascinating seeing all of you here, old and new friends. Can you hear me well? Un poco más? ¿Así? Okay, perfecto. Okay, so I'm going to read the section 1 of the foreword for the Wolfpack, which I co-authored with Peter Edwards, one of the most important journalists on writing organized crime in Canada. And this is a little bit of my story. Okay, so this is section 1 of the Wolfpack. My relationship with Juan Carlos began through his attraction to my close friend. As the new kid in town, he approached me looking for a wingman to set them up. Eventually, I agreed and began organizing quick trips after class or during recess to a Mexican fast food place near our high school. I invited Juan Carlos to join us under the pretext of helping him to get to know his new peers. Despite his efforts, his romantic endeavors with my friend failed. I asked her why she had rejected me. She replied in a somber tone, "There's something in his eyes that doesn't seem right." Juan Carlos was a quiet, discreet, slim guy with a big mustache and cowboy boots who enrolled in our school just to complete his final year. He moved from Guadalajara to our smaller town, nearly 600 kilometers away. Guadalajara was then, in the late 80s, home of the notorious group led by Mexico's original padrino, the Godfather, Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo. In his 70s today, Gallardo is a historic figure in the world of global drug trafficking. He transformed transnational organized crime by assigning territories across the country to distinct cocaine trafficking groups, later self-identified as the Gulf, Juarez, Tijuana, and Sinaloa cartels. Protected by corrupt authorities, Gallardo's own Guadalajara cartel operated as an umbrella for smaller groups that worked mostly within the Golden Triangle, a mountainous area located between the states of Durango, Sinaloa, and Chihuahua, towards the country's northwest. Because of its altitude, weather, and access to the US border and the Pacific Ocean, the region is ideal for harvesting marijuana and heroin, and then smuggling into the world's largest illicit drug market. One of the organizations doing this work and doing it under the protection of the Guadalajara cartel was led by the father of my new classmate. As the school year continued, Juan Carlos revealed more about himself. He was the first person I had ever met with a connection to the drug trade. That said, he never offered me or any other students marijuana joints, heroin balls, or carefully folded packages of cocaine. As I look back to 1988, it was clear Juan Carlos had learned to be careful. He was being groomed to inherit his father's place as the leader of a drug trafficking organization. One day that spring, classes finished early, and Juan Carlos surprised some friends and me with an invitation to spend the day at his family's place at the suburbs. The place was a farm with a spacious 2-bedroom house, a separate bungalow, and a barn located in a semi-rural area outside of the city. The property was well known in the community because it was enclosed by walls as tall as any other house in the area, and was often visited by small groups of brand new pickup trucks with tinted windows. Word on the street was that the house was owned by someone influential, either a politician or a drug lord, who enjoyed throwing parties that frequently extended for days and included beautiful women and famous musicians, all hired to perform. Minutes after we arrived at the property, our host left in his white pickup truck. About 30 minutes later, he returned with beer, ice, and chips, lots of them. That was the first of many parties, all-inclusive ones, that Juan Carlos threw for his classmates. And they quickly turned him into the most popular guy at school. He seemed to enjoy his new status, despite the quiet, calm personality that he maintained even after drinking a few beers. I don't remember ever seeing him drunk, even as the parties raged around him. Perhaps because our relationship had begun before his surge in popularity, and because my family made sure I wasn't a partier like most of our classmates, my friendship with Juan Carlos matured in trust. That gave me a chance to know who he really was, and to confirm that my friend had meant when she said something about his eyes didn't seem right. Do you like guns? Juan Carlos asked me one day as we were driving across the town on his pickup. Oh, yeah, I do like guns. Who doesn't? I replied. My attitude was typical teenager macho stupid, deeply influenced by the culture of weapons that still exists in northern Mexico. He smiled, and as he continued driving, pulled a Colt 38 Super Pistol out of from under his seat. It was an automatic gun popular among drug traffickers, particularly among those working up in the mountains, because of its reliability, heft, and firepower. Have you seen one of these? He asked, handing it to me. I grew up in a small town where men carried guns, so seeing a pistol was not unusual. But handling a loaded one without adult supervision was a new experience, as exciting as it was imprudent. After holding the gun for a few minutes, and once the initial excitement passed, the future journalist in me came out. Why do you need to carry a gun? I asked. Juan Carlos smiled. You never know when it may be helpful to have it with you. As the end of the term approached, my admiration for Juan Carlos was diluted by the excitement of plans to move to a new city to begin my undergrad studies in communications. One day after school, during the final weeks of classes, Juan Carlos and I talked about our futures. He told me he will be moved back to Guadalajara to study business administration in a private university. Again, my incipient reporter rose up and I asked, "Why do you want to study that?" I guess I judged the book by its cover, because in my view, Juan Carlos didn't fit the mold of an entrepreneur, store manager, or businessman, particularly when driving a pickup with a loaded gun. He looked at me and smiled, and bam, a glimpse of the person taking shape behind the mustache appeared. My family thinks I need to go to school and learn business administration. They think it will be best for us and for nuestro negocio, our business, he said, as his facial expression hardened. Right in front of me, he transformed from a quiet high school student into a cold-hearted adult. I required no additional explanations to understand the nature of the business and the source of the money, the house in the suburbs, the need for a gun, and the secrecy Juan Carlos always kept about his family and himself. His future plans involved becoming part of the new generation of drug kingpins, more educated, not addicted to drugs, tech-savvy, and with a less flamboyant lifestyle than their predecessors. An awkward silence, then an unexpected invitation. Would you like to work for us?
Thank you. The book is wonderful if you have the opportunity to pick up a copy. The Wolf Pack. It goes on from there. I want to ask you, Louis, how many years did you spend as a journalist in Mexico covering the cartels and the drug trade?
I started my career in my second semester of university in 1989, and I left Mexico in 2008. As focusing on organized crime, violence, I would say since 1995. When I started, I was the first reporter who wrote about the femicides in Ciudad Juarez. If you are familiar with that, a lot of serial killer we had at the beginning, 1995, and I was there. I wrote those stories.
You survived many years in that environment.
Yeah.
My question is, at one moment you decided it's time to get out. Could you talk about that moment?
Well, the first, the situation is that things started to get worse as particularly after 2005, a year before the declaration from President Felipe Calderon against organized crime. This wasn't begin, or the situation didn't begin in 2006. It began a year before, when, well, I will say 2001, when Chapo Guzman escaped from the prison the first time. He started to organize, to mastermind a plan, to started to seize the border, the whole northern border. And that's when I started to see things. I travel a lot from east to west, all across the border. But then the situation began to get closer to home. That's when Ciudad Juarez became the epicenter of the war on drugs. And in that context is when I started to, the level of threats increased. And
Did I read, I think, that you were doing interviews with people both involved with the drug trade and law enforcement people.
Yeah.
And didn't you do like 15 interviews, and all of those interviewees were eventually killed?
I don't remember. Well, I don't have the names, but I can tell Actually, the other day I was talking to my brother-in-law in Juarez. He lives in Juarez, and we were just teasing. Oh yeah, I'll be there soon. And he said, "Don't worry, probably the guy who wanted to kill you is dead." And I replied, "Well, maybe it's time for me to go and make new enemies." So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, probably a lot of them are killed for sure, and people that I knew for sure are dead.
Right. So when was it? When did you get up in the morning and say, I have to get out of here and get my family out of here?
I guess when the threats spread into my family, because when those threats were against me, I'm okay. I'm used to it. You learn how to navigate in this environment. But then when the threats, when your family is threatened, that's when you say, you know what, this is not right. And that's the moment when we decided to flee.
Well, you have a couple of things. Just what is your opinion now on the war on drugs?
The war on drugs. It's complex. We have to understand there's a narrative of criminalization, and it's a narrative us versus them, prompted by the United States, which has a lot of interest in Mexico's resources. So for them, it's very convenient. We have seen now with this Texas new charge against Mexican organized crime groups and the government. But in reality, think about it. They are chastising the Mexican government because of fentanyl, but they never speak about cocaine. Why? Because fentanyl is visible. You can see the problem of fentanyl on the streets of the United States. And second, because fentanyl is killing the poor. So cocaine is, and this is something that I also question about Canada. We never talk about, here Canada, Vancouver has a lot of problems with fentanyl, blah, blah, Toronto, blah, blah, blah. We never talk about the massive amount of cocaine smuggled into Canada. In this book, we documented one single cell of organized crime from Guadalajara smuggling to Canada in 1 year, 20 tons of cocaine to be consumed here. And we never spoke about it.
Does it stay in Canada?
Most of them, yes. So it's a lot. So again, why the conversation is focusing on fentanyl? Because fentanyl is visible, because fentanyl is the poor and the rich. So what about the rich who use cocaine? The guys who work here in downtown. Yeah. So that it's complex. Now we have the government, Mexican government, which is useless and corrupt. Yeah. So.
Okay. We're just to finish up. What I'd like to do is have Louis read a short essay, and I think it says a lot about Canada in terms of dealing with refugees that come here looking for protection, peace, and prosperity.
Yes. Okay. Well, before I finish, thank you again. Okay, this is called 14 Years and One Tweet. On September 27, 2022, on our 14th anniversary of arriving in Canada, seeking refuge after fleeing Mexico to survive death threats from organized crime and corrupt officers, I signed my contract as a part-time janitor in a supermarket in Toronto. Ironically, the next day, I was introduced at a conference at the University of Ottawa as an award-winning journalist in exile, an author published by the world's largest printing house. After 2 days of inspiring interaction with activists in exiles, I returned to Toronto and prepared for my first early morning shift cleaning toilets and mopping floors, the second time for a living on Canadian soil. Hours later, I shot a couple of photos and posted them on Twitter with the following text, quote, "Because 2 master's degrees from local universities are not enough for a refugee to get a seat at the table with the good Canadian society, here I am, back to be a janitor again after 11 years of studying, applying, and publishing. Close quote. With an uncomfortable sense of relief after venting my grievances online, I turned on my phone and returned to work. To my surprise, my tweet became a forum with almost 500,000 impressions and more than 47,000 interactions from both sides of the political spectrum. Some were empathic, some aggressive. Overwhelmed by the unintended attention to my post, I realized there is a need for Canada to evolve as a country, to transition from being refugee-friendly to becoming immigrant-embracing, where experience overseas is recognized, integrated, and promoted within Canada's social and economic fabric. I have been 14 years in this country, navigating from lining up outside food banks in the suburbs of Vancouver to high-table dinners at Massey College. As a newcomer in 2008, my survival jobs included delivering community papers, painting houses, replacing windows, and cleaning 5 different buildings. My wife, who's here, an experienced human resources specialist back in Mexico, also worked as a housekeeper in the mornings while I cared for our 3 children. In 2011, we moved to Toronto after I had a scholarship from Massey College as a journalism fellow. A new world was revealed to me as I transitioned from a protected person to a permanent resident and from a night cleaner to a guest speaker. During my fellowship, I understood that journalism in Canada was, and is, unfortunately, in a dire situation. After Massey, I enrolled in the Monk School of Global Affairs for a master's degree, which will help me to reinvent my career using my Spanish and professional background as foundations. After 2 years and considerable student loan debts, however, my hypothesis proved wrong, even after receiving Canadian citizenship. Many unsuccessful cover letters and crafted resumes later, I redirected my efforts toward academia and applied to 4 different PhD programs across the country. None of them wanted. In 2015, the Toronto Star hired me as a content editor for the Star Touch app. But after 6 months, the project failed. And as one of the last to be hired, I was among the first to be let go. From there, another fellowship and some casual gigs helped me to pay only the minimum credit card balance while taking care of my wife during her 2-year-long excruciating cancer treatment that involved 11 rounds of chemo, 22 sessions of radiation, a 10-hour-long lens surgery, and an unexpected lung operation. Then, my second attempt at reinvention brought me to study and complete in just 1 year a master's in disaster and emergency management at York University with additional diplomas in Latin America and global security studies. I also co-authored a book, The Wolfpack, on drug cartels and Canadian millennials, which has been praised as an eye-opener and a warning of how the dangerous tentacles of Mexican organized crime groups have extended into Canadian soil and the deadly consequences of this. This was my job and my duty as a journalist in Mexico. And although it is not my job anymore, it still is my responsibility to my fellow Canadians to expose such ugly truths. Nevertheless, in late 2022, the only position I got an interview for was the janitorial one, a job I kept for 2 months until an early morning email invited me to apply for a position as a seasonal teacher's assistant in Toronto's Metropolitan University School of Journalism. Apparently, among the thousands of viewers of my cyber rant, someone thought I could be a good fit for the position. My contract will end in 3 more weeks. The world is not the same as in 1969 when Canada signed the United Nations Convention relating to the status of refugees. As knowledge and information have become more accessible and interconnected, more people have rebelled against injustice, fought for democracy, and or denounced criminals. Many of us have fled our countries, and some have come to Canada for safety, carrying our most valuable possessions: our minds, our professional experiences, and our human dignity. Doctors, farmers, teachers, journalists, and many more have received a second chance to survive in Canada, but not to live fully as Canadians because of prejudice, fear, or ignorance. I believe it is time for society and government to embrace, meaning adapt, adopt, and expand the skills, knowledge, and experiences of all Canadians towards the common good, from newcomers to First Nations. I know there's not enough room for some professions. Therefore, education is essential to reinvent, reorient, or rediscover who we are. Please, please, let us pay Canada back with all that we have and be as diverse as we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thank you so much for being here. And, a very valuable guest. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So, yeah, thank you, folks. I think we have to end it there. This has been a great afternoon, and I want to thank you all for coming. I will remind you once more, there is a donation jar on the way out the door, and for any of you who feel so compelled. And thank you, this was great. This was the conclusion of our third reading, and there's more coming in June and November, and maybe the next year as well. So again, thank you, and we'll see you again, I hope. I look forward to it.
And one more thing, please subscribe our YouTube channel, Writers in Exile, and Facebook, Instagram, and all social media platforms, and contribute something on our platforms. And those of you who are new to our group, please send us your pieces for the upcoming events, readings. So we have a wonderful editor and senior mentors. So you are in a good hand. Thank you very much for coming. Enjoy the rest of the event.
Wow.